Greetings and welcome to the Adeptus Artorum YouTube channel. I'm your host for today's video, Caros Retinue, and today we delve into the history of the abhuman race known as the Squats, and how or why they might fall to chaos and how they were subsequently destroyed as a race, leaving only squatted remnants throughout the various worlds of the Imperium. I must note that this faction exists as a separate entity to the newly released Leagues of Votann, so if you're looking for lore concerning them, rest assured we will cover it sometime in the future. But if that lore is the subject matter that you've come looking to find information on today, this may not be the video for you. Now, before we approach the subject topic of our abhuman squat cousins and how they can be tainted by the ruinous powers of chaos, I thought it was important for me to state that there is a massive lack of lore concerning this topic, and the lore surrounding chaos squats especially hasn't really been expanded upon since the second edition of 40K. However, considering the recent emergence of the newly appearing squat faction, the Leagues of Votann, I thought that for those of you who are like me, have a very curious mind, might like to hear some content covering both the facts we know about squats, chaos squats, and other possible outcomes for them in the 41st millennium. If you're looking for a video with lots of references to 100% matter-of-fact written lore, this video will probably only serve to aggravate you as it has for me to research it, to be honest. So with that thought in mind, I've simplified it as best I can to try and achieve some kind of fluid timeline. So let's get into it. Now, for those of you who don't know, the original foundations of the Squat Empire were human colonists who, in the age of technology, had discovered mineral-rich worlds around the galactic core. This was, of course, many millennia before the Emperor revealed himself to humanity. The colonisation of these mineral-rich worlds would come at the perfect time, as Old Earth's resources and mineral wealth had been heavily depleted, and these worlds were rich in rare minerals unobtainable on Earth. However, when the worlds were looked upon from a perspective of colonisation, let's say, they saw that the worlds were bleak, dark and grim, engulfed by radiation storms originating from a black hole located in the galaxy's core. This in turn would force the colonists to have no alternative but to terraform the surfaces of many of the planets, drilling deep caverns into the planets for them to eventually be transformed into rich mining worlds. Now, due to the somewhat hostile nature of the planet's surface, the colonists began constructing underground societies, and during the horrifying warp storms of the Age of Strife, the human colonies of these worlds genetically adapted and genetically engineered themselves to their new home, becoming physically tougher and altogether more resilient, with a much denser skeletal-muscular system than the baseline human. Essentially, they were much smaller, tougher and wider. They existed in this form for many millennia before the rise of the Imperium, but when that day would finally come, it was more than obvious to see that the Squats had developed a cultural identity of their own and would not wish to obey the rulership of the Administratum. Therefore, the Emperor, considering the vast riches the worlds held, didn't find it appropriate just offering up the ultimatum of join us or die. So instead, the Emperor offered that in exchange for their independence, they were to provide troops for the Imperial Guard and trade exclusively with other Imperial worlds, providing access to their vast riches of mineral wealth. It's also fair to note that when this bargain was struck, the Squats allowed tech priests of the cult Mechanicum to access several of their STC technologies that had never before been seen by members of the cult. They also owned a high proportion of working class devices dating back to the humanity's dark age of technology, more so than any other known place in the galaxy. Now, the freedoms and the independences imposed upon the Squats by the Imperium were very loose indeed. They were still expected to follow Imperial policy concerning Xenos and any other foreign affairs, which truthfully they never found difficult, as they had become a very xenophobic people due to their varied histories of war. And it's also fair to mention, while on the subject of culture and creed, that the Squats did not follow the ways of the Imperial truth. They instead followed a form of ancestral worship, not unlike that of the Old Norse Vikings in real history, wherein they believed that their own deeds carry onto the shoulders of future family members, and so they would exist after death as a part of that relative, essentially able to watch over them from a place of divinity. To achieve this, it was essential to never bring dishonour, but honour and glory to their clans, More modernly, in the times of the 41st millennium, without the emperor to control the zealous masses, the ecclesiarchy incorporated this religious view into the imperial cult. The zealous priest explained that these so-called ancestor spirits of the squats were in fact just watched over and essentially created by the emperor of mankind. And the squats of the 41st millennium were happy enough to accept this as a concept and would follow through to worship the emperor on those terms, holding an exemption not unlike that of the one between the ecclesiarchy and the cult Mechanicus. Now, the worlds that we referred to previously, now known to the squats as the Homeworlds, were eventually devoured in Millennium 41 by an unnamed Tyranid hive fleet, and the remnants of the squat race were scattered throughout the Imperium. So, here's where things become slightly annoying with continuity, as during the psychic awakening of the 41st millennium, an Imperial ship, much to their shock, encountered a group of what they deemed to be remnants of the imperialistic squat race near the world of 47 Grendel in the galactic core. It was, however, amended just recently in the Leagues of Votan Codex that these so-called squats were in fact prospecting fleets of the Leagues of Votan. Now, it truly is a sad topic for some that squats have been on a journey without continuity, essentially being deemed a failure in their early years by Games Workshop, eventually being pulled from the shelves. And if, like me, you enjoy the concept of the Leagues of Votan, but very much as a separate entity entirely from the squats that align themselves with the Imperium, then this correction in the new codex is a little bit sad. Now, I feel as though I've given enough of a background on the essentials of what squats are for those who didn't know. And with this background provided, we move on to the subject matter of chaos squats. Now, first of all, I always have to have these arguments with people in the 40k community about whether or not squats are even physically able to become inflicted by chaos in the true sense of the word. So, like, to that of a Poxwalker or a Fallen Astartes. And if in fact a squat must 100% choose chaos for themselves of their own free will, as opposed to being manipulated to fall to chaos. I've heard some silly arguments arguing in the favour of squats are immune to chaos, but quite honestly, this just cannot be. If a building can physically succumb to chaos, which we know to be a fact from easily obtainable sources, such as the game Inquisitor Martyr, then it feels fairly safe to assume that alongside humans, in which there are a subspecies of squats, should be more than able to take on the physical manifestations of chaos. The thought that a squat couldn't be manipulated into worshipping chaos in a similar way to that of a guardsman, I personally think is beyond sense, as not only is there noted evidence to the contrary, but to think chaos has any different kind of an effect on abhumans as opposed to humans, I find illogical. There are plenty of circumstances in which the abhuman ogrins have fallen to chaos, making it equally as likely of an occurrence for squats. Therefore, I find it very fair to say that yes, squats can 100% fall to chaos in every sense of the meaning. Tentacles and all, for all you Nurgle fans out there.
So, chaos squats, what do we know for a fact?
Well, in the darkest days of the Imperium, known as the Horus Heresy, the traitor Primarch Horus wanted the help of all human colonies and worlds, including that of the various abhuman worlds, to help stamp out the reign of his father, the Emperor of Mankind. In offering out his hand to many worlds of the Imperium, it is known that several squat households and brotherhoods were convinced that this was the right option, and allowed themselves to be corrupted by the War Master's dark quest. Now, as previously mentioned before, squats as a race and culture were in fact a separate culture altogether to the creeds imposed upon humanity by the Imperium of Man. And in this fact, I think it's appropriate to consider, from what little we do know of the squats, that their independence from the Imperium was always defined as very important to them. It's possible that in this simple fact alone, there is an explanation as to why squats wouldn't feel all that connected to the Imperium as a whole, but only the little piece of it that was theirs. Squats, though a fairly big empire, were not a very predominant race outside of the galactic core, and for that reason, the squat culture encouraging dominance, honour and pride within their own race outweighed that of the Imperial Creed, and I strongly believe that Horus or his emissaries would have made use of this fact, making it much easier to convince several households and brotherhoods of the Imperium's evil and side with them. Logically speaking, these households and brotherhoods had gained nothing from the Imperium, for under basically the threat of destruction, they had nothing other than the ability to keep the practice of their own culture and religion, which I assume a proud race like the Squats would have felt entitled to anyway. And surely certain Squats would have been infuriated at the thought that their religion was being diluted in the way that it had been by the ecclesiarchy. It's clear to see in humanity that for every pro there is a con, and it's just simply impossible for the members of a race such as the Squats to simply always agree on everything, especially politics or governance, which for most races is the most arguable amongst themselves. It is noted various small mentions and official Games Workshop artworks that during the Horus Heresy, these Chaos Squats clearly descended upon the ranks of their own kind that had remained loyal to the Emperor, and throughout the Horus Heresy, there must have been constant battles between these two sides in a conquest for dominance within the galactic core, but eventually, in conclusion to the events of the Heresy, a grand majority of these Chaos Squats were supposedly dragged into the Eye of Terror with the rest of the traitor forces. It is noted that rumours persist of isolated events in which Chaos Squat remnants still conduct raids in various parts of the Imperium. They engage in combat with Imperial forces. Also noted that Chaos Squats are sometimes responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of Chaos Titans, as well as the construction of Chaos Demon engines. Now, lastly, the final thing to consider concerning Chaos Squats takes us back to our previously mentioned events, wherein the warp storms that occurred within the time period known as the Age of Strife caused many of the settled Squat homeworlds to be dragged into the warp. This theory, we can consider a slightly different approach that excludes the influence of Horus, yet seems fairly viable too, which is, of course, in the fact that we know from documented experiences, once something is in the Immaterium, it is then fair game for any of the contesting Chaos Gods to grab up and do what they should so want with it. And this has been theorised to be the circumstances in which Chaos Squats, whom worship specific Chaos Gods, could fit into lore. This is a concept, something that could be deemed as extremely plausible, considering all that we know of the warp and its effect on humanity. Now, closing statement, I'll say this. Squats, though heavily underdocumented, are a very interesting concept within the lore of 40k. And honestly, I've come to find that the less that's there to know for a fact, the more wiggle room we have to express our own 40k stories and concepts. Subjects like these bring up great debates and questions, and sometimes we find that there's unlikely to ever be a true answer. But I hope that with this video I've at least managed to cover the very basics of what Squats are, what Chaos Squats are, and where they fit into lore within the Imperium, Chaos, and the 41st millennium. As always, guys, I'm going to leave you with a relevant quote for today's topic, and this one is from the Primarch of the Space Wolves, Leman Russ, making a statement on behalf of the Squats, in which he exclaims them to be an example to be looked up to by the rest of the Imperium. Now, not something that should be forgotten so easily. Do not underestimate the Squats. They survived for millennia, cut off from the Imperium, and assailed from all sides. Their determination and resilience is an example to us all. Okay guys, it's sadly come to that time in the video where I must leave you, but if you like this video, please don't forget to drop a like, and if you still want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel. The more attention videos get, the more likely we are to create 40k videos in the future. If you feel as though there's anything I've missed, or you just want me to cover some lore that might interest you, pop it into the comments below. And with that, this has been a relatively short video on the Squats and Chaos Squats of 40k. I've been your host, Caros Retinue, and thank you for watching.